My life before the Karen invasion was meticulously structured, a symphony of seamless routines governed by digital precision. As an IT security specialist for a major logistics firm, I was a gatekeeper of digital fortresses, a guardian against online marauders. Ironically, the fortress I neglected was my own home. My work demanded constant travel, often sending me to far-flung corners of the globe. Singapore was the latest stop on my itinerary, a 10-day business trip promising both professional advancement and a brief respite from the humdrum of suburban existence. Before departing, I meticulously prepared my house for its solitary confinement. Every door and window was triple-checked, each lock a reassuring click of safety and security. The main water line was shut off, an antiquated precaution learned from a childhood incident involving a burst pipe and a flooded basement. My dependence on technology took center stage. A network of smart home devices formed my virtual sentinels, ready to alert me to any disturbance. The Ring security cameras, strategically positioned around the property, were my eyes and ears while I was away, feeding me a constant stream of visual data I could access from anywhere in the world. Motion sensors were armed, ready to trigger alarms and notifications at the slightest anomaly. Even my trusty smart fridge, programmed to greet me by name, stood as a silent guardian. I also enlisted the help of my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kindly elderly woman with a keen eye for detail and a penchant for gossip. She agreed to collect my mail, water my plants, and generally keep an eye on things. I felt confident that my home was well protected. The flight to Singapore was uneventful, filled with the usual turbulence, stale airplane food, and the constant drone of jet engines. I dove headfirst into my work, attending meetings, giving presentations, and troubleshooting security vulnerabilities. The days blurred into a whirlwind of technical jargon and cultural exchanges. I found some time to explore the vibrant city, indulging in the local cuisine and marveling at the stunning architecture. But even amidst the exotic surroundings, my mind kept drifting back to my house, my sanctuary, my digital fortress. I regularly checked the Ring app, confirming that all systems were nominal, and Mrs. Henderson sent reassuring texts about the overgrown state of my lawn. The trip was a success, but the anticipation of returning home began to build. On the day of my departure from Singapore, I was a bundle of nervous energy. The thought of sleeping in my own bed, cooking in my own kitchen, and relaxing in my own living room filled me with giddy excitement. As the plane touched down at LAX, a wave of relief washed over me. I retrieved my luggage, navigated the throng of arriving passengers, and ordered an Uber. While waiting for my ride, I instinctively reached for my phone and opened the Ring app. This was when the first signs of trouble appeared, the ominous portents that would shatter my tranquil return. The cameras were offline, not just one, but all of them. A collective silence had fallen over my digital sentinels. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to troubleshoot remotely, rebooting the system, checking the Wi-Fi connection, but nothing worked. The cameras remained stubbornly offline, their digital eyes closed to the world. A wave of unease washed over me. I dismissed it as a technical glitch, a temporary hiccup in the matrix, but the unsettling feeling persisted. Then I checked the garage door. Open. The digital sensor, which was supposed to confirm its closed status, was reporting a gaping void. Panic started to claw at the edges of my mind. Finally, I checked the front door sensor. Disconnected. Someone had deliberately severed its connection to the network. My blood ran cold. This was no technical glitch. This was an intrusion. Home, my fortress, had been breached. The sense of violation was profound. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly helpless. The Uber arrived, but I barely registered its presence. I jumped into the back seat, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I gave the driver my address, but I knew that the house I was returning to was not the same one I had left behind. The Uber ride was excruciatingly slow. Every red light felt like an eternity, every detour like a deliberate act of torture. My mind raced, conjuring worst-case scenarios. Had I been robbed? Was my house being used as a drug den? Or worse, was someone lurking inside, waiting for me to arrive? The questions swirled around in my head, each one more terrifying than the last. As the Uber turned onto my street, I thought we had taken a wrong turn. The familiar landscape of manicured lawns and neatly painted houses was replaced by a scene of utter chaos. My lawn, once a verdant expanse of meticulously trimmed grass, was now littered with trash bags, overflowing with refuse and smelling faintly of decay. The carefully arranged flower beds were trampled, their colorful blooms crushed beneath the weight of neglect. One of my windows, previously pristine and sparkling, was now duct-taped with a grimy piece of cardboard. On the cardboard, scrawled in childish handwriting, were the words, "Private Residence." It was like something out of a dystopian movie. I gripped the armrests of the Uber, my knuckles turning white. The spray-painted message on my garage door sent a shiver down my spine. "Live, laugh, love," it proclaimed in garish pink letters, a grotesque parody of the aspirational slogans that adorned suburban homes. The sight was both absurd and deeply unsettling. I paid the Uber driver, practically leaping out of the car before it came to a complete stop. I sprinted towards my front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was barricaded from the inside. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I pounded on the door, shouting my name, demanding to be let in. But there was no response. The only sound was the muffled thumping of bass-heavy music emanating from within. I knew I had to find another way in. I raced around the back of the house, my mind racing, searching for an opening. I hopped the fence, ignoring the sharp sting of thorns scratching my arms and legs. I reached the side patio door, which I had foolishly left unlocked. With trembling hands, I slid it open and stepped inside. What I saw inside made me freeze. The scene that unfolded before my eyes was beyond anything I could have imagined. My living room, once a sanctuary of peace and tranquility, had been transformed into a chaotic playground. A woman was sprawled on my couch, watching reality TV, eating hot Cheetos and yelling at 6 boys who were running absolute chaos through my home. She was a caricature of suburban excess, clad in leggings and a stained tank top, her hair piled high in a messy bun. The boys, ranging in age from toddler to teenager, were wreaking havoc with reckless abandon. One was skateboarding through my hallway, narrowly missing my expensive antique table. 2 were jumping on my bed with muddy shoes, leaving a trail of dirt and grime on my pristine white duvet. 1 was trying to microwave a whole potato in foil, oblivious to the imminent danger of a potentially explosive situation. The smallest one, barely old enough to walk, was peeing in my potted plant, seemingly unconcerned by the absurdity of the situation. The air was thick with the smell of stale food, body odor, and the faint aroma of marijuana. It was like a scene from a nightmare. The woman on the couch finally noticed my presence. She turned and screamed, as if I were the one breaking in. The sound was ear-splitting, a primal shriek of outrage and indignation. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice dripping with hostility. "You have no right to be here. This is my temporary residence." She then launched into a tirade of nonsensical legal jargon, claiming that tenants have rights, and that I was violating them. "Tenants?" I roared, my voice echoing through the chaotic scene. "What tenants? This is my house. I own this house." The audacity of this woman was astounding. She had not only invaded my home, but was now claiming ownership, invoking some bizarre interpretation of landlord-tenant law. I demanded to know who she was, how she had gotten into my house, and what gave her the right to turn my life upside down. Her response was a rapid-fire barrage of excuses and justifications, a tangled web of lies and half-truths. She claimed that she had seen a post online stating that the house was vacant, a claim that was patently false. She said that a friend had told her it was a crash pad opportunity, as if my home were some kind of transient shelter. And then she uttered the words that sent my blood pressure soaring. "I moved in legally under squatter's law." Squatter's law? Was this some kind of twisted joke? I was a law-abiding citizen, a homeowner who had worked hard to acquire his property. And now this woman was claiming that she had a legal right to occupy my home simply by virtue of squatting in it. I felt a surge of anger, a primal urge to evict her and her unruly brood immediately. But I knew that I had to remain calm, rational, and above all legal. I couldn't afford to lose my temper and risk escalating the situation. I calmly explained to her that I was the owner of the house, that I had been away on a business trip, and that she had absolutely no right to be there. I produced my driver's license, my credit cards, and any other form of identification I could find, all bearing my name and my home address. I even showed her the deed to the property, which I kept in a fireproof safe in my bedroom. I pointed to the photos on the wall, the ones that depicted my family, my friends, and my life, all centered around this house. I even tried to reason with her through my smart fridge. Now, I know this sounds ridiculous, but my fridge does greet me when I come home. "Look," I said, pointing to the digital display on the fridge. "It literally says, 'Welcome home, Malcolm.'" But she remained unmoved. Her eyes were glazed over, her mind seemingly impervious to logic and reason. She was convinced that she was in the right, that she had a legal claim to my property. As I was arguing with her, she clutched her phone, her fingers frantically dialing a number. I realized that she was calling 911. My heart sank. This was not going to end well. She spoke to the dispatcher in a tearful, trembling voice, weaving a tale of woe and victimhood. She claimed that a man was trying to illegally evict a struggling single mother and her 6 minors. The audacity was breathtaking. She was portraying me as the villain, the aggressor, the heartless oppressor, and she was using her children as props, as instruments of manipulation. I stood there, speechless, as she spun her web of lies, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any detail she could twist to her advantage. I knew that I had to act quickly, to counter her narrative before it was too late. I needed to gather evidence to prove that I was the rightful owner of the house and that she was an intruder. But how? My security cameras were offline, and my traditional alarm system had been disconnected. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Then I remembered something. Before leaving for Singapore, I had backed up all of my security camera footage to cloud storage. I had done it as a precaution in case of theft or damage to the physical storage devices. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope I had. I grabbed my laptop, which I had left in my suitcase, and frantically searched for the cloud storage. Login details. After a frantic search, I found it, and my heart leapt with joy. The footage was there. I quickly downloaded a few key clips, focusing on the ones that showed the woman and her children breaking into my house. The footage showed them climbing through the upstairs window with a ladder, dragging in duffel bags, fast food containers, a puppy, and even a blow-up mattress. It was irrefutable proof that they were intruders, not tenants. It was my digital ace in the hole. Within 10 minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the air as 3 squad cars rolled up to my house. The sight of the flashing lights brought a strange sense of relief, but also a deep sense of dread. I knew that this was going to be a long and difficult ordeal. The police officers emerged from their vehicles, their faces grim, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. They approached the house cautiously, their eyes scanning the scene, assessing the situation. I stepped forward, my hands raised in a gesture of peace, and identified myself as the homeowner. Karen, meanwhile, was putting on a performance for the ages. She was fake crying on the porch, clutching one of her children to her chest like it was a press conference. Her voice was a theatrical blend of sorrow and indignation, calculated to elicit sympathy and outrage. She repeated her story about being a struggling single mother who had been unfairly evicted from her temporary residence. She even managed to shed a few tears, which she wiped away with a dramatic flourish. It was a masterful display of manipulative theatrics. One of the officers, a young woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached me and asked for my identification and proof of address. I calmly explained the situation, showing her my driver's license, my utility bills, and the deed to the property. I then explained that my security cameras were offline, but that I had managed to retrieve some crucial footage from cloud storage. The officer listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She then turned to Karen and asked for her side of the story. Karen launched into another tearful tirade, repeating her claims about squatters' rights and illegal eviction. The officer remained impassive, her eyes fixed on Karen's face, searching for any sign of deception. I could sense that she was skeptical, but she was also bound by protocol to hear both sides of the story. While the officers were reviewing my documents and listening to Karen's sob story, one of the boys decided to take matters into his own hands. The oldest one, maybe 16, pulled out a drone and started live streaming the whole standoff on TikTok. He tagged the video "Juror Karen Castle," a reference to the woman's name and the fact that she had taken over my house like a medieval fortress. The video went viral in minutes. Thousands of people were watching live, commenting, and sharing their opinions. Many were sympathetic to Karen, believing her to be a victim of circumstance. They flooded the comments section with messages of support, using hashtags like "Free Karen" and "Let Her Live." They accused me of being a heartless landlord, a greedy capitalist, and a villain who was exploiting a struggling single mother. The comments were brutal, personal, and often filled with profanity. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. I was being vilified online, portrayed as the bad guy in a situation that I had no control over. I watched in horror as my name was dragged through the mud, my reputation tarnished by the mob mentality of social media. But then, a twist. As the live stream unfolded, a woman watching the video across the state recognized Karen. She recognized her as her ex-tenant who had trashed her Airbnb in Palm Springs, left with unpaid damages, and blocked her number. The woman had been searching for Karen for months, trying to recover the money she was owed. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw Karen on the live stream, squatting in someone else's house and playing the victim. She immediately sent me a direct message on TikTok, outlining her experience with Karen and providing evidence of the damages to her property. The woman's testimony was a game-changer. It exposed Karen as a serial squatter, a con artist who preyed on unsuspecting homeowners. I immediately handed the woman's message to the police officers. They were skeptical at first, but as they read the details, they began to realize that they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple landlord-tenant dispute. The police officers, armed with the information from the woman in Palm Springs, began to dig deeper into Karen's background. They contacted the Palm Springs Police Department and confirmed the woman's story. They learned that Karen had a history of squatting in vacant properties, often leaving behind a trail of damage and unpaid bills. They also discovered that Karen had been using various aliases and fake identification to avoid detection. The house of cards that Karen had built was beginning to collapse. The officers questioned Karen more aggressively, confronting her with the evidence they had gathered. Karen, realizing that her lies were unraveling, became increasingly agitated and defensive. She denied the allegations, claiming that she was being framed, that the woman in Palm Springs was a liar, and that I was conspiring against her. But her denials rang hollow. Her eyes darted around nervously, and her voice trembled with fear. The police officers then discovered that Karen had been active in several Facebook housing help groups, where she had been tracking when people were going on vacation. She had been using this information to identify vacant properties that she could squat in. She had even created a spreadsheet of upcoming Airbnb vacancies, cross-referencing it with flight schedules she had pulled from public social media posts. It was a sophisticated and organized operation. This wasn't just a random act of desperation. This was a calculated and premeditated scheme. The police officers realized that they were dealing with a professional squatter, a con artist who had turned squatting into a lucrative, albeit illegal, business. They immediately called for backup. More squad cars arrived on the scene, their sirens blaring, their lights flashing. The street was now teeming with law enforcement officials. But the story didn't end there. As the police officers investigated further, they uncovered evidence of even more serious crimes. They discovered that Karen had been posing as a property manager to some of the homeowners she had targeted, using fake credentials and forged documents. This constituted identity theft, a federal crime. They also found evidence of interstate fraud, as Karen had been traveling across state lines to carry out her squatting scheme. The police officers realized that they had stumbled upon a major criminal enterprise. They decided to call in the feds. Agents from the FBI and the Secret Service arrived on the scene, their faces grim, their briefcases filled with legal documents. The situation had escalated from a simple landlord-tenant dispute to a full-blown federal investigation. The agents took over the questioning of Karen, grilling her about her activities, her accomplices, and her motivations. Karen, overwhelmed by the pressure, finally broke down and confessed to her crimes. She admitted to squatting in multiple properties, using fake identities, and defrauding homeowners. She revealed the details of her elaborate scheme, explaining how she had used social media to identify vacant properties and how she had recruited her children to help her carry out her plan. By the end of the night, the boys were being escorted out of the house by Child Protective Services. They were taken into protective custody, pending a hearing on their welfare. Karen was losing her mind, screaming and sobbing as she was led away in handcuffs. She accused me of ruining her life, of destroying her family, and of depriving her children of a home. She even claimed that she was about to launch her own YouTube family channel and that I had ruined her brand. It was a bizarre and surreal spectacle. Here she was, a criminal facing multiple felony charges, and she was more concerned about her YouTube career than about the consequences of her actions. Karen was taken away in cuffs, still screaming something about squatters' equity. The phrase was a nonsensical mashup of legal terms and delusional beliefs, but it perfectly encapsulated her warped worldview. She genuinely believed that she had a right to my property, simply because she had occupied it illegally. The removal of Karen and her children from my house was a momentous occasion, but it was far from the end of the ordeal. The aftermath was a long and arduous process, filled with legal complexities, emotional stress, and the daunting task of repairing the damage to my home and my peace of mind. The legal proceedings against Karen were lengthy and complicated. She faced multiple charges, including squatting, fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment. The case attracted significant media attention, with news outlets from across the country reporting on the Karen Castle saga. The public was fascinated by the story, captivated by the audacity of Karen's scheme and the bizarre circumstances of her arrest. The trial was a circus, with Karen putting on a theatrical display of remorse and contrition. She claimed that she was a victim of circumstance, that she had been driven to squatting by poverty and desperation. She even attempted to portray herself as a champion of the homeless, arguing that squatting was a necessary act of resistance against a system that had failed to provide adequate housing for the poor. But the jury saw through her lies. They found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to several years in prison, and her children were placed in foster care. While the wheels of justice turned, I was left to deal with the aftermath of Karen's invasion. The damage to my house was extensive. The floors were stained, the walls were scrawled with graffiti, and the furniture was broken and soiled. The stench of stale food, body odor, and marijuana permeated every corner of the house. It took weeks to clean and repair the damage, to restore my home to its original state. I had to replace the carpets, repaint the walls, and buy new furniture. The cost was substantial, but it was a price I was willing to pay to reclaim my sanctuary. But the emotional damage was even more profound. I felt violated, vulnerable, and deeply shaken by the experience. I had lost my sense of security, my trust in others, and my faith in the system. I found myself constantly checking the locks, scrutinizing strangers, and questioning the motives of everyone I encountered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Karen or her associates might return to exact revenge. Slowly, over time, I began to heal. I sought therapy, talked to friends and family, and focused on rebuilding my life. I upgraded my security system, installing new cameras, motion sensors, and alarms. I became more vigilant about protecting my privacy and securing my property. I also learned a valuable lesson about the importance of community. My neighbors, who had initially been wary of me, rallied around me in the aftermath of the invasion. They offered their support, their help, and their friendship. They helped me clean up the damage, repair the fences, and keep an eye on my house. They showed me that even in a world of digital connections and virtual communities, the bonds of human connection still matter. The Karen Castle saga was a traumatic experience, but it also taught me some valuable lessons about resilience, community, and the importance of protecting what is yours. And though I'll always be more careful, returning home from a trip, I hope that Karen is rotting in jail thinking about her squatter's equity.